Khorne here, and today I have felt inspired to make a video on the worst campaigns to play in Warhammer 3. Now, what do I consider to be the worst campaigns in the game? Well, they're not going to be my least favorite campaigns, let's just get that out of the way, but rather they're going to be campaigns that are objectively the least polished, least thought out, and are the least enjoyable campaigns you can play. Whether it is because they were abandoned since release, neglected over time, or just have an awful location on the map surrounded by enemies with little to no tools available to you to actually do well in them. To say these campaigns are in need of an update is a bit of an understatement, and what they would more than likely need is a full reset on almost everything about them. It's actually just beyond infuriating. Nothing about this campaign was fun. Nothing about this campaign was fun. Everything was just pain, pain, pain. Here's even more pain. I actually hate it. Thank you, game. I actually genuinely hate it. So, to start off with, we will be going from campaigns that are the least egregious in their bad design to the campaigns that are the worst offenders. And the first campaign we will be talking about, in the number 5 spot, will be Khorne. Now, Khorne is on this list not because of his campaign being poorly designed in terms of mechanics or bonuses or the lack of tools. In fact, with the Tomb King update, his campaign got a whole lot better and slightly less miserable. The problem with a Khorne campaign, you see, is his location. In the middle of a frozen wasteland, surrounded by the Tomb King's natural predators, while not being compensated for it in any way. Most territory surrounding you is going to be either unpleasant or uninhabitable, and you won't be able to get more than 10 suitable climate settlements for the majority of your campaign. So, wherever you decide to go, you will encounter nothing but penalties until you manage to go back to Nehekara. This is bad enough as is, but the worst part is dealing with all the enemies you are surrounded by. From dwarves to dark elves to the murder hobos, and round it all up with the warriors of chaos. These are all the worst possible enemies you can face when playing as the Tomb Kings, as most of them are heavily armored, which is a problem for your early game units to deal with, and they all have extremely high amounts of killing power, so they can easily deal with both your poorly armored trash as well as with your heavy hitting units. And you know what's funny? It's like CA giving him back the Higher Titan was an extremely bad move, as it actually gets easily killed by a tier 1 unit of Dark Shards. Yeah, this army really needs something like chariots. I feel like them bringing back the Higher Titan for this army actually hurts you in the first battle. Like, give me a Scorpion or a Cambrian Warsphinx or something. Don't give me a Higher Titan, I hate these guys. Now, the worst part about all of this is that if you want to win the campaign, as in actually follow through the campaign objectives, most of them are actually located all the way over at Nehekara. So you're basically stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by unpleasant climate and enemies that will absolutely murder you in seconds, while also being forced to go back home and build up every settlement in the desert if you want to achieve campaign victory. Some people might say that the campaign is simply challenging and not at all bad design, but you have to keep in mind those are the same people that beg Slaanesh for more CBT. Then at the number 4 spot we have Luen Leonker. Most people will say that all Bretonnia campaigns are terrible already, and that Bretonnia is an extremely outdated and miserable race. I'm here to tell you that is actually just false information, and those people simply either don't know how to play Bretonnia or are trying to play Luen. You see, Bretonnia is a decently strong race in the game. They aren't amazing, but they aren't terrible either. However, all of that goes down the drain when we are talking about Luen, as his campaign is honestly nothing more than misery. On the surface, there is nothing wrong with his campaign. You're in your homeland, you have a few nearby enemies, you have allies close to you, and you are not playing with a terrible race. So what is the problem? Well, you see, the problem are the enemies that you don't actually see, namely Be'lakor and Wulfric. Normally, what you would want to do in a Luen campaign is to deal with the vampires and the greenskins infesting your lands, but because most of your territory is located on the coastline, you are in vision of both Be'lakor and Wulfric, who both hate you, and since you're the player, they will usually always declare war on you. Now, this might not seem as that big of a deal, except that there is no way to actually deal with either of them. You see, Be'lakor is basically right next to you on Albion, but to get there, you have to set sail for multiple turns. Afterwards, you have to land and attack his monkey pets, and then you have to occupy his extremely well-defended settlement. This sounds easy to do, except for 3 problems. First, I have left out the fact that you have to kill his army before doing any of that, otherwise you can't even begin your journey there. Second, while Luen is making the journey to go kill Be'lakor, you will be attacked by vampires and Norskins from every direction, so trying to keep any territory you have conquered will be almost impossible. And third, even if you can properly defend yourself and take over Albion, it is all red territory for you, meaning that it is absolutely worthless, and you neither want it nor can you defend it. Which basically means you have to abandon it for another AI faction to reclaim it later on, and don't you worry about a thing, that faction will more than likely also want to kill you. So whatever you do, the invasions from Albion will never stop coming. Now, if you were thinking to yourself, well, I can just confederate all the other Bretonnia factions via technologies, and then I can use their territory to fund more armies to wipe out my enemies. Well, I have some bad news for you. They are all dead. Yeah, by the time you're able to get the confederations through your technology tree, they will have all already died. And if you're thinking that surely the Fae will survive, well, she died to Icatclaw. And if you go and meet her before she actually does die, well, now you will not only be at war with just the Norskins, the demons, the vampires, the greenskins, but also with rats and cows. So basically, no matter what you try and do in a Luen campaign, it will always backfire in one way or another. And this campaign is an example of a campaign in desperate need of an update in terms of faction mechanics that can actually help you either negate climate penalties, so you can actually go and kill Be'lakor and Wulfric, or mechanics that will allow you to field more armies to allow you to properly defend your territory. As in its current state, this campaign is absolutely just pure torture. Next, at the number 3 spot, we are going to have the Changeling. You see, the problem with the Changeling is mostly the fact that it is a half-baked campaign. Sure, it isn't difficult, actually it's not difficult at all, but it isn't fun to play either. In fact, it is absolutely miserable to play this campaign. And for a faction that is designed to be all about ruining other people's days, it sure does love to ruin your enjoyment of the game. For the most part, this campaign is simply just boring. With no real challenge or difficulty, the AI can't really do anything to hurt you or make you suffer a defeat. You see, this campaign is basically if you enabled creative mode. But at the same time, you aren't really enabling creative mode at all, and are in some ways even more restricted about how you progress through your campaign than usual. So, here are my biggest issues with it. You see, in order to expand your empire, you have to spread your trickster cults, which are like undercities, locations beneath settlements which the AI can't really access, so you never have to worry about losing them. Now, you expand these cults by attacking a settlement and choosing the option to spread your cults. But by doing so, you will lose all of your campaign movement range, which might not seem as though it is a big deal, but next turn, when you get your movement back, you're unable to move past the settlement you have just attacked, as it got its garrison replenished and you are forced to move around its zone of control, which is the equivalent to you just having less campaign movement range. And if you think you can just attack the settlement, Well, if you do, you will now have to blow it up, and basically whoever designed this interaction hadn't played a single campaign to actually see how it would work. And then we have the schemes, which a lot of them aren't anything that complicated to do. But some of them are borderline impossible to achieve because of how passive the AI is. Such is the case with this one right here. Win 15 land battles in a specific region. Now, this is a turn 75 changeling campaign, and I haven't been able to achieve it. And not because I haven't fought any battles, but rather it is because settlement battles don't actually count as land battles. You see, with how passive the AI is on the campaign map, and how they absolutely hate going outside their settlements, most of the time when you do fight against them, it will be because you have attacked one of their settlements. And these battles don't count towards the scheme. And since most of the time your armies are basically invisible to the AI, you will pretty much never get attacked, and will thus never be able to progress this scheme. Basically, this is a campaign that gives you the most freedom in how you play the game, while also being the most limiting simply because it was not at all tested before it got released. And unfortunately, they never went back to update the campaign since. Now, moving on to the second worst campaign of the game, which came down to basically a coin toss simply because both of these are equally as horrendous. But I will place Daniel the Demon Prince in the number 2 spot. The reason for that, and boy oh boy, where do I even start with this one? Well, let's start with the fact that his campaign is one that had absolutely zero thought put into it, with him being one of the weakest legendary lords in the game, while having one of the worst faction mechanics as well. His mechanic of being able to equip different body parts belonging to different chaos gods is something that sounds cool in theory, but the way it was implemented in the game is absolutely horrendous, with some of the body parts you can get at the very end of his reward tree being worse than the ones you can get at the very beginning of it. Combine this with the fact that he can't equip any items, and the fact that he doesn't have any melee or spellcasting skills means that he is extremely unfun to interact with or use on the battlefield. Now, while on the topic of his mechanics, let's go over everything else from it. So, you advance through the mechanic by sacrificing captives to the god you wish to devote to, getting bonuses from said god for their corresponding units, or getting lesser versions of some of their faction mechanics, such as being able to seduce units if you devote enough to Slaanesh. Now, this all sounds pretty good until you realize that the lesser bonuses you get are tied to the rest of your campaign. Let's take growth for an example. You see, the Demon Prince has very bad growth. Probably the worst growth in the entire game by far. I mean, in comparison to the Demon Prince, the dwarves would seem as though they breed like rabbits. The reason for this is that you have access to bloodletting, which before Omens of Destruction used to give you growth whenever you fought battles. But after Omens of Destruction, bloodletting was changed because of whiny passive players that want to just sit in their settlements for 50 turns doing nothing, so that now it no longer gives you growth. Of course, Daniel, being as abandoned of a campaign as he is, got in no way compensated for this, and now he can barely reach a tier 3 settlement by turn 50. Then another example would be the Slaanesh seduction mechanic, which costs you treasury to use, and it actually costs you a lot of treasury to use, with no way to reduce the cost or increase the amount of treasury you can use to seduce units. So most of the time, you will only ever be able to seduce one low tier unit per battle. Not only that, but the Demon Prince is also one of the poorest factions in the game, with his income buildings being way too expensive to build, while also providing you with a pitiful amount of income, which makes using this mechanic extremely limiting. Which also leads me to talk about his settlement building, and how it is one of the worst in the game by far. You see, you can devote your settlements to a single god, and from it recruit units devoted to that god. But your settlement buildings also provide bonuses based off of which god you devoted them to. This makes it so that you will always want to devote your settlements to Slaanesh, as Slaanesh settlements provide you with the best economy. So basically what this means is that you're only getting the illusion of choice when it comes to the way you build up your empire. And I have already talked about how his growth and income buildings are awful, but when it comes to your settlement building, there is kind of nothing else to talk about, as every other building is nothing more than an expensive recruitment building that provides you with no bonuses whatsoever. Lastly, let's just talk about your unit recruitment, which really shows just how abandoned Daniel campaign really is. So, for you to be able to recruit units, you will have to devote enough points to a certain god. Say if I wanted to recruit a Exalted Bloodletter, I would have to devote this much to Khorne. But this isn't true for some of the DLC units you can get, as they simply put these units into Daniel's campaign, but never even bother to integrate them into his mechanic and call it a day. So now, 3 years after Shadows of Change released, you're still able to get all of those units without progressing his mechanic. And then we have the way in which he recruits units. And well, there is basically no way to increase the amount of units you can recruit, neither locally nor globally, unless you devote to Undivided, which then gives you a few extra global recruit slots. So basically, you will only ever be able to recruit up to 3 units locally in your regions, which means building armies is an absolute nightmare, and expanding through the map is even worse. Now, when it comes to building his mishmash armies of units devoted to different chaos gods, Nurgle and Slaanesh for example, which is a major draw for this campaign, also doesn't work well at all. As unlike with the Warriors of Chaos, the lords leading these armies can only ever buff units that they are aligned with. So let's just do a little bit of a recap for this campaign. You have a terribly designed campaign that heavily relies on other factions' mechanics without providing proper support or balance for said mechanics, while also never getting an update whenever said mechanics get changed. You have a terrible faction leader that gets weaker the more you progress through his mechanic, and whenever new units get introduced to his faction, they are just thrown in there without a second thought as to how they should fit inside of his mechanic. And all of this just goes to show you how CA couldn't give less of a shit about his campaign. And lastly, we have the worst campaign of them all, which I'm pretty sure you all saw coming at this point, Marcus Wolfheart. Now, the reason I have placed Marcus here and not Demon Prince, even though the Demon Prince has probably the worst campaign of the two, is because Marcus is a paid-for DLC lord that has been in a broken state ever since he got introduced all the way back in 2019. I just want you to let that sink in. He has been a buggy mess of a campaign for 7 years now, with bugs that were introduced with his release still being present in the game today. He has a mechanic that is basically there to punish you for, just playing the game. The more enemies you fight, the more settlements you conquer, the stronger your enemies will become. This is supposed to be thematic to show how lizards are resisting your invasion of Lustria, but more often than not, the enemies you're fighting are actually going to be demons or undead. And the lizards, for whatever reason, will get mad at you for it. And have you ever even tried fighting unbreakable demons? They are an absolute nightmare to deal with. Then there is the whole you being locked out of your buildings portion of the mechanic, which if you don't know, most of your buildings are locked and you basically have to go through your campaign conquering territory, fighting enemies to be able to advance the prestige system that lets you build higher tier buildings. But this mechanic can also bug out and lock you out of being able to actually build the buildings it is supposed to unlock. So that way you're now stuck in this hellhole, not being able to get better units, all while having to fight nightmare fuel enemies. And the saving grace for this campaign, which are supposed to be the unique heroes you're able to recruit, are lacklusters to say the very least. with bonuses that barely do anything for his campaign. But that isn't even the worst part about them. Rather, it is the fact that they too can bug out. You see, they all come with their own quest lines that, once fulfilled, give you bonuses. But the problem is, if you ever get any of them wounded, their questline will simply stop functioning, which is going to result in you being locked out from ever completing it. And to add insult to injury, you also aren't able to recruit any of the Empire Electrocount state troops, which CEA has had multiple opportunities to add to his campaign. So to summarize, Marcus's campaign is a hell of a broken mess, with bugs dating all the way back to 2019. A mechanic that punishes you for playing the game, and numerous bugs that will stop you from ever progressing through it. And to top it all off, CA not taking any opportunity they had to actually fix these issues and make his campaign better. But these will be my picks for the worst campaigns in Warhammer 3. I am curious to hear what you guys find to be the worst ones, so do leave a comment. But please, just please, don't try to defend or justify any of these campaigns. If you find them fun, that is all well and good, but you cannot deny that these campaigns are absolutely horrendous. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe for future content. Thank you all for watching, and until next time.
Khorne fights as one.